What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you each and every Monday and Thursday by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I cover the Nashville Predators here at the Hockey News. I am joined, of course, on this Thursday by a great friend of the show turned official co-host, Michael Augello, who covers the Buffalo Sabres for us here at the Hockey News. And we've got so much to talk about today. It's the day before the deadline. News is breaking as we speak. But before we get into it, do want to let you know that we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Hey, hockey players, why drop a fortune on your sticks when you can snag pro-level composite sticks at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. These all-black beauties are made for sniping, saucing, and shutting it down, all while looking sharp on the ice. And the best part, prices start at just $85.13 US for a 3-pack. Yep, you heard that right. Elite sticks without the elite price. Hit up Sticks.com. Again, that's STIX.com now and gear up without the markup. Let's go. Okay, literally news breaking as we speak, Michael. We've got to talk about big trade that happened Wednesday night, maybe a bit of a confusing one. We're going to try to make some sense of it here, but the Nashville Predators traded Tommy Novak and Luke Schenn to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Michael Bunting and a 4th-round pick in 2026. So again, little confusing for both sides. These are two teams that were both out of the playoff picture, expected to be sellers at the deadline, but now they're selling to each other. So what do you think, Michael? Do you think that this could be a precursor to something else maybe?
This one's bizarre. It really is. From the Pittsburgh perspective, I mean, Novak, he played really well last year and earned a 3-year extension. Hasn't played as well this year. But I think there's still a lot of love around the league for him. And I think Pittsburgh looks at this situation and says, we've got Malkin, we've got Crosby. They're not going anywhere. So we need a 3C that's a little more dynamic. And, I think he sort of fits the bill. The Schenn part of it makes absolutely no sense for Pittsburgh. But I do think, and I tweeted this yesterday, I think this is a, trade for a guy who's an asset and then flip him. And I don't know whether Pittsburgh can retain salary on him. It's 2.75 for Schenn for next year and the rest of this year. But we know Dubas, former general manager of Toronto, we know that Luke Schenn has been connected back to Toronto. Toronto needs a right shot defenseman. And Dubas has a lot of his former draft picks along with his director of amateur scouting, Wes Clark. So, I theorized a guy like Topi Niemela, who was a 3rd-round pick in 2020 and doesn't seem to be a favorite of the current administration under Brad Treliving and Craig Berube. But it could be other players, but there are a lot of draft picks, a lot of Wes Clark, Dubas draft picks that they might be interested in a Schenn deal. Otherwise, it makes no sense for a team that's old to get older with and he's a quality player, but it would make more sense that Schenn is flipped somewhere before 3 p.m. on Friday. As for the Nashville part of it, Emma, I'm going to throw it to you because I don't get it. I don't.
That makes two of us. This one is not, it doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface unless you look at it as more of a salary dump in a way. You mentioned Novak had that 3-year extension. He's in the first year of that. He's making $3.5 million a year. Schenn, you said 2.75. And then they get Michael Bunting back in the deal. So he's making 4.5. So at the end of the day, Nashville nets about 1.75 million in cap space. So I guess there's that. But again, if this is a team that, should be selling and, it kind of seems like Luke Schenn would have gone to a contender. Like that would have been more of something a contender would want. And like you said, not Pittsburgh, not a team that's just getting older. Novak was kind of an interesting one because he, like you said, he had underperformed this year, but then again, on the Nashville Predators, who hasn't underperformed this year. So I think that's just more indicative of the rest of the team and how poorly things have gone this year. And, he's a guy that had value last year, and it honestly sounded like he could be a really valuable trade chip around the deadline last year. But instead, the Predators doubled down and they signed him to a 3-year extension, only to trade him exactly 1 year to the day later. So it's just very bizarre. I'm not quite sure what the plan is here for Nashville since that trade. They have since picked up 2 players off of waivers. They claimed Jakub Vrana from Washington. Important to note, he played under Barry Trotz in Washington when Trotz was a coach there, and Jordan Osterley from Boston. So kind of, I guess, backfilling some of those spots there, vacated by, you have Novak. He's primarily a center. He can also play on the wing, but you're backfilling that a little bit. You get Jordan Osterley on the blue line. It's crazy to think with Roman Josi and Jeremy Lauzon injured right now, the most tenured Nashville Predators defenseman is Brady Shea. And he joined the team this summer. So that tells you something. Definitely wild times going on in Nashville right now, and have to feel like the moves are not done yet. But we do have to move on because there are other teams making moves here too. Tampa Bay acquired Oliver Bjorkstrand, and they brought back Yanni Gourde from the Seattle Kraken. In exchange, they got 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick, and Michael Eyssimont. So in Julien Brisebois' availability after the trade, he said, quote, "I'd rather have a lineup of good players than bank a ton of draft picks." Now, it seems like, we remember a couple years ago with Tampa Bay overpaying for Tanner Jeannot. Could this be another one of those situations where this is an overpay by the Lightning for these 2 players?
It's an insane overpay. It's ridiculous. Now, I get what the philosophy of Julien Brisebois is. He's got a core group, some of which are in their mid to late 20s. Cirelli and Point, Kucherov, I believe, is over 30. But this is a group that, they subtracted Stamkos. They added Jake Gensel. They've had a really good year. They're red hot. Vasilevsky is back to being Vasilevsky. They may think they're 1 or 2 pieces away from having a legitimate chance of coming out of the East, and I can't argue with that. But the one weakness, and I think we talked about this on a previous show, was their bottom 6 was terrible. The bottom 6 was one of the worst in the league. So this deal improves the depth, and I would think that, probably if they're giving up 2 firsts and a second, they're probably going to try to sign Gourde to an extension because he's in the final year of his deal. Bjorkstrand has another year at $5.4 million. But, clearly the Tampa Bay Lightning don't value draft picks. It's strange because the core group that we just mentioned, most of them are draft picks. But once you have assembled that group, I guess you can assemble the supporting cast from trades and just keep perpetuating this until, it's like Pittsburgh and they get too old and can't compete anymore.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. It's there. Maybe we look at Pittsburgh as a cautionary tale. First they try the win now mode and that didn't work. So then they have to pivot to sort of a rebuild on the fly approach. So interesting to see how different teams are approaching this deadline this year. Speaking of which, we just talked about Tampa, the Florida Panthers as well. Obviously, earlier signed, or they traded for Seth Jones, rather. They've now got Nico Sturm as well. They're making moves too. So with Florida and Tampa making these significant additions ahead of the deadline, what does that mean for the Toronto Maple Leafs? Because if they want to be competitive in the Atlantic, the teams that are right behind him are pretty busy at the deadline making moves. And so is Brad Treliving under a lot of pressure right now, do you think? Do you think that he's going to start making moves here?
If you believe the Toronto media and if you believe the fan base, he's under extreme pressure. And especially with the fact you've got 2 of that core 4 in Mitch Marner and John Tavares heading to unrestricted free agency. So it's conceivable that this is the last crack for that core 4 as we know it. Just touching on the Panthers, they're going all in again. They after the Stanley Cup, they lost a bunch of players like Ekman Larson and Montour and a few of their supporting cast. So the deals that they've made, they replace Spencer Knight with Vitek Vanacek, who they got from San Jose. So now they have a veteran backup goaltender. They bolster their bottom six with Sturm, and now they have a right shot defenseman in Seth Jones. They're probably done, but I put nothing past Bill Zito, and he's got cap space to play with because we know Matthew Tkachuk is not coming back for the rest of the regular season. As for Toronto, their shopping list has been pretty clear for about 2 months. It's been a third line center and a defenseman, most likely a right shot defenseman. The only thing that could alter that is what's going on with Carolina and Mikko Rantanen. If all of a sudden he hits the market, the reports are that Toronto would be in on him. I don't know who the heck is playing center then, but I don't think it's going to be Rantanen. But they're going to do something, because if they don't, they're not going to win the Atlantic Division, and I think it's imperative for them to finish first in the Atlantic and let Florida and Tampa Bay beat the living hell out of each other in the first round. If they do that, then I think Toronto has a chance, if they don't come up against somebody that's really tough in the first round, to beat one of those two teams in the second round. Otherwise, I think they're probably going to end up with a really challenging first round matchup. And we know the history of the Leafs right now. I don't know whether they can pass that challenge.
All right. Well, sticking in the East, Jack Hughes got some rough news for the Devils this week. He is going to be out for the rest of the season, including the playoffs, after undergoing another shoulder surgery. So the Devils have announced that he's expected to be ready for training camp next season, but it's still a huge loss for this Devils team right now. And still, reports have pretty much suggested that their plans at the trade deadline haven't changed, even with Hughes on LTIR now. But in your opinion, do you think that maybe the Devils should be buying at this deadline?
In a word, no. I don't think. Now, they obviously disagree with me because they've already made a trade today, acquiring Brian Dumoulin from the Anaheim Ducks for a second-round pick. So if they're giving up a second-round pick for a rental defenseman, then they believe that they can at least advance around. And we know what the perception is, the East is wide open. I don't know how you replace Jack Hughes. I think he's irreplaceable. I know you can move Nico Hischier to the top line center, and then maybe if you go out and you trade for, say, a Brock Nelson, he could plug in as a number 2. But you're just not as good as you were with Jack Hughes. And we know they're getting Markstrom back, so they'll be better. And Dougie Hamilton just got injured, but he's supposed to not be out long term. But the pieces are not there for them. It's going to be really tough for them to carve a path out of the Eastern Conference and to the Stanley Cup final without Jack Hughes. So if I were them, I would conserve my assets and try to go about it in the summer. You're a young team. You've got a lot of quality players, but I can understand why they want to push the edge of the envelope and maybe try, but I don't think it's going to work, but they're going to not listen to me and do what they want.
Yeah, it's been a tough go of it for the Devils here, kind of knocking on the door these last couple years. This was supposed to be the big breakout year, and then of course they get this awful injury news for Jack Hughes. And like you said, there really is no replacing a player like that. So it will be interesting to see what they do here. All right. Since returning from the Four Nations break, Connor McDavid is a -9. And the Oilers have lost 5 of 6 games. So obviously the sky is falling in Edmonton. Will the addition of Trent Frederick be able to help get the Oilers back on track? Or does this team only go as far as McDavid goes?
Well, the injury status of Frederick, from the reports that I heard when the trade went down, he may not be available until the playoffs. Now, he's on LTIR, and if he stays on LTIR, now his salary wasn't that big, but then they can make even more additions. I don't know who they're going to trade other than Matthew Savoy. They don't have many draft picks and many prospects left in the organization. But I mean, this team will go as far as Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl take them. And last year, the difference was you had players like Evander Kane early on and Evan Bouchard and Zach Hyman, who all played well in the playoffs, and they sort of supplemented McDavid and Draisaitl. But if it's just them, because a lot of those players are not having the years that they had last year, and if Stuart Skinner is just average rather than above average, they could lose to the LA Kings if the LA Kings make a big move before the deadline. So I'm not effusive in my praise of the Edmonton Oilers right now, and I think they're in trouble. But there's still 5 weeks to go for the rest of the regular season, and if they finish in second place and get home ice advantage in the first round, they'll probably beat the Kings and then maybe build some momentum.
All right. Well, got to ask you about your Buffalo Sabres here, Michael. Jordan Greenway just signed a 2-year, $8 million extension with the Sabres. Now, in your opinion, do you think that this was a fair contract for both parties? And is Greenway the kind of player that can eventually help the Sabres be competitive?
Greenway is the type of player that the Sabres don't have enough of. He's a solid two-way player. He's big. He plays well defensively. He's been a good penalty killer this year. But clearly, and it's a good deal for him, he's not a $4 million player, even with the cap going up. His career high is 12 goals. I understand the point of view of the Sabres. They wanted to keep him. They didn't want to lose him for nothing. But they paid a Buffalo tax, and that tax means a team that has not made the playoffs in 14 years and is desperate to keep the players that they have and somebody who they believe is a positive for the organization. They paid more than I think he would get on the open market, and that's the reason why he signed. And it was only a 2-year deal. So he's 28 now. He'll be 30 as a free agent, and he'll probably be able to get another deal, another long-term contract when he turns 30. But this is just the reality. If the Sabres are going to re-sign Jason Zucker, who was in Nashville last year, they're going to have to pay him more than he would get on the open market. Not to say that nobody wants to play in Buffalo, but it's a tough challenge to get players to stay or come here.
Yeah, tough sell for sure. All right, let's take a quick little break from the trade talk for a second, because we got news this week that TNT is going to be releasing a documentary that's focusing on Gabriel Landeskog's recovery from his injury. It's going to be called A Clean Sheet. So in a recent interview with The Athletic, Landeskog, who obviously is the captain of the Colorado Avalanche, said that he believes he's trending in the right direction towards returning to play. He has strung together some solid weeks of on-ice training. But then again, it's been 2 years since he has played in an NHL game. And then he had this surgery, and that has set him back even further. So should we be tempering our expectations here for the rest of his career if he is able to make a return with Colorado? How high, or maybe not high, should our expectations be of him?
First of all, I'm rooting for him. I would want to see him back. I think he's a great player. It's sad when a great player gets injured and can't continue his career, and I hope he does. I hope he is able to come back. That being said, I think the odds of him becoming the player that he was, which was a top line player, are slim. But right at this point, I think he just wants to get back. And the only example that I could remember going back in recent history of a player that missed as much time as he has and came back to be an effective player is Gary Roberts. Gary Roberts had the injury, I think it was a neck injury, and he missed more than 2 years, and then came back with, I believe, Carolina, and was a very effective player, and then signed with Toronto and had a good stretch there, and I think ended with the Florida Panthers. But he and Pittsburgh, he played with Sidney Crosby early on in his career. So Gary Roberts was a very effective player, and if Landeskog can somehow get past this rather large hurdle and just play, even if it's to 50 to 75% of what he was, that'll be a victory for him. I really hope I really hope he comes back.
Yeah, I think we're all rooting for him. Just a tough blow he's been dealt here over the last few years. So hope to see him back with the Avalanche sooner than later. The Columbus Blue Jackets have extended Mathieu Olivier to a 6-year, $18 million extension. That is, I think, a lot higher, a lot more than a lot of people would have expected him to get. What do you think? Was this a smart long-term move for the Blue Jackets?
Well, he's 28 years old and he's having his career year right now. He has 12 goals. So he struck while the iron was hot. They wanted to keep him there. They have the cap space. He's turned himself into an effective player. He's arguably one of the top 2 or 3 fighters in the league, and nobody wants to mess with him. So, I mean, in that sense, I think it's good for him in terms of getting the long-term security, and it's good in the short term for Columbus that they are able to keep a player, and who knows what they would have been able to get in a trade for him, because I'm sure a number of teams would have been interested. The 6 years is what is the sticking point for me. I mean, he's an enforcer, and he's more than just an enforcer, but that's his main positive or main aspect. And this is signing him through age 34. That's going to be tough. So, Columbus may regret this deal in, say, 2028 or 2029, but right now I think they consider it a win.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how this deal ages in Columbus. Over in Ottawa, apparently, rumor has it, the Senators have expressed interest in Blackhawks forward Ryan Donato. So Donato is in the middle of a career year. He's got 22 goals and 45 points, and he's only got a $2 million cap hit. So do you think that this is the kind of player who could be a good fit in Ottawa, or should they be turning more of their focus to adding to their defense?
Well, when we talked about Ottawa a few weeks ago and what they were targeting, I said the blue line, because their blue line simply isn't very good. You have Zub and you have Sanderson and Shabbat, and then I think it's pretty average at best after that. And I think, keeping the puck out of the net is more important for them. But I think what this indicates, if they do trade for Donato, is that they're not 100% confident in the health of Shane Pinto and Josh Norris. Now, Josh Norris just returned in the last week after missing a month, and I don't know what the status of Pinto is, but if one of those guys goes down after March the 7th, that might bury their chances of making the playoffs. So I think this is a preemptive move, but they're going to pay through the nose. This is as you said, Donato is a 20-plus goal scorer for the first time in his career. He's always been an good offensive player. The defensive side of the game has always been sort of questionable. But, with a $2 million salary, there'll probably be more teams than Ottawa interested in him. I would not be surprised that Ottawa would have to give up one of their first-round picks, either in 25 or 26, to get him. And that's a cost that probably Chicago would I think they'd be interested in that, but I'm not sure if Steve Staios in Ottawa would be willing to trade a first-round pick for a rental.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what else unfolds over the next 24 hours here when it comes to these rumors and whether anything comes to fruition. Let's talk about Utah, because they were very busy on Wednesday. Utah Hockey Club made 3 extensions. So they signed Ian Cole and Alex Kerfoot each for 1 year at $3 million, an extra year in an extension. I believe Cole's $2.8 million, but with bonuses, it pushes it up to 3. Then the big signing, the big extension they made was their goalie, Carl Vejmelka. They signed him at 5 years at $4.75 million AAV. And this is after they had already signed Olli Maatta to a 3-year extension earlier in the week. So looking at Utah, is this a sign, in your opinion, that Bill Armstrong really believes that the current group is something that he wants to build around here? Or is it, is this something that they can be competitive with?
I think that Bill Armstrong sees that, this current group has some positives. They're going in a positive direction. So he wants to retain as many players as possible, but he's not extending himself in terms of term. Kerfoot and Cole, the salaries were not unreasonable, and he only signed them for 1 year extra. Mata is a pretty decent defenseman, and he signed him for 3 years. Vejmelka is young, and he's played very well this year after not playing good at all last season in Arizona. And the contract that he signed was basically the Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen deal from Buffalo, which was 5 years at under $5 million. So all the contracts are reasonable, and I think this shows that Armstrong and Ryan Smith, the owner, are maintaining some flexibility and could be big players in free agency because they have a lot of cap space to play with.
All right. Well, wrapping up here today, hot off the presses, we have the New York Rangers who have traded Reilly Smith back to the Vegas Golden Knights in exchange for Brendan Brisson and a 5th-round pick. So Smith was with the Golden Knights on their Stanley Cup run in 2023. The Rangers are going to be retaining 50% of his contract, which was already being retained by Pittsburgh. So Vegas, at the end of the day, is getting him at a very reasonable $1.875 million. So, I mean, Vegas and their cap gymnastics strike again, it seems. But what are your initial thoughts on this trade, Michael?
I'm waiting for them to trade for Jonathan Marchessault. No, I mean, I saw this one coming a mile away. The Rangers have pretty much checked out. I mean, when they traded Ryan Lindgren, I think that was an admission that they're selling and that they're, trying to acquire as many pieces as they possibly can. In this deal, Brendan Brisson is probably the best prospect in the Vegas organization, and he's not having a very good year in Henderson, but he's a former first-round pick and a talented kid, and maybe a change of scenery will help. But they know Reilly Smith. He won a cup with them. He was there. I believe he was an original Golden Knight. He was part of that deal with the Florida Panthers that brought Marchessault to Vegas. So it's a smart move. I don't know how they fit in the cap, but the Rangers retain 50% of the salary. So it's never surprising what Kelly McCrimmon does. It's never surprising what Bill Zito does or Julian Brisebois. These guys, I think they just invent cap space to be able to make deals. And I wouldn't be surprised if Vegas does something else before 3 p.m. on Friday.
Yeah, just go get Jonathan Marchessault, Chandler Stevenson, just run it back again this year. Yeah, definitely. I'm sure there will be plenty more happening between now and Monday for us to talk about on our next episode, but that is going to do it for today's. Lots going on, lots to talk about here. So thank you, as always, Michael, for joining me today. Thank you again to Stix.com for sponsoring. We will be back on Monday with an all-new episode with lots more trades to talk about, I'm sure. We will see you then.